This is Newsroom. Hello and welcome from Johannesburg here in South Africa. My name, of course, is Eben Jansen. This show is live. It's broadcast from our studios in Auckland Park. We're also streaming live on YouTube right now with the whole show available on our YouTube channel on demand. Today, sentencing procedures gets underway in the sensational trial of Oscar Pistorius. We'll be at courtside shortly and thereafter talk to a lawyer about the process ahead. Violent political intolerance continues to rear its ugly head on the country's political landscape, and we'll talk to a professor about that. By then, we should be live inside North Gauteng High Court. If not, we'll get an update from the Western Cape High Court as the trial of Shrindavani continues there today. But first, let's get the morning's news from Katrine Miller.
Well, hello and welcome to Newsroom. I'm Katrine Milan, and let's take a look at the morning's headlines. Media from all over the world have once again descended on the North Gauteng High Court this morning ahead of the pre-sentencing arguments in the Oscar Pistorius trial. Arguments ahead of Pistorius' sentencing are expected to begin within this hour. Last month, the court found Pistorius guilty of culpable homicide for killing his girlfriend Riva Steenkamp. The defence is expected to lead evidence on why Pistorius should not receive a harsh sentence. The defence could also argue that serving a prison term would not be in the interest of justice and that the athlete could better serve the public through a suspended sentence or community service. Proceedings have certainly taken a toll on both the Steenkamp and the Pistorius family.
We know Oscar's version of what happened at that tragic night. And we know that that is the truth.
But it's only one thing missing, it's fever. We've got together, but we've missed one. And I think I will get over that.
Then in another high-profile case today, the defence is due to continue cross-examining state witness Mzoma Doda Kwabe in the honeymoon murder trial of Shrindavani in the Western Cape High Court today. Davani, the murder trial, was adjourned last Thursday after both Kwabe and Davani complained of stomach pains. British businessman Davani is charged of orchestrating the murder of his wife Annie while the couple were on honeymoon in Cape Town in November 2010. In KwaZulu-Natal, police are investigating two shooting incidents that left 15 people dead in Izakeni township outside Ladysmith in KwaZulu-Natal Midlands. The incident took place late on Saturday and have left the community reeling in shock and fear. A special task team has been deployed to investigate further and to determine whether the incidents are linked. Then in a move that could deliver a serious blow to the fight against Ebola, nurses and medical workers in Liberia are threatening to go on strike over a pay dispute from today. Members of Liberia's National Health Workers Association said they would not report for work from today unless a demand for an increase in hazard pay was met. Around 200 health workers are known to have contracted the disease in Liberia, where personal protective equipment is scarce, and at least 95 of them have died from the infectious disease. And a month after the death of 116 people, including 80 South Africans, during the collapse of a church guest house in Lagos, Nigeria, Archbishop Emeritus Desmond Tutu has appealed to the Nigerian government to ensure the swift return of the deceased to South Africa. The deceased were killed when the multi-story guest house attached to the Synagogue Church of All Nations, owned by televangelist T.B. Joshua, collapsed on September the 12th. It was reported that 349 South Africans were visiting the church at the time of the disaster. 25 South Africans were returned home for treatment. All these top stories and more are available on our Newsroom Facebook page. You can also follow us on Twitter at SABC Newsroom. Eben, over to you.
Thanks, Katrine. 27-year-old Paralympian Oscar Pistorius returns to the North Gauteng High Court 1 month after he was found guilty of killing his girlfriend Riva Steenkamp. The double amputee, who was convicted on 12 September, will find out whether or not he will face jail time in South Africa's prison system. Pistorius has always maintained that the shooting of his girlfriend was a tragic accident. He faces a fine and a possible sentence of up to 15 years in prison after his defense that he had shot a gun through his bathroom door because he thought there was an intruder in his house. There will be a more lenient sentence. Well, this will be a more lenient sentence, and the maximum 25 years he would have faced for murder. Now, sentencing procedures commence today and will continue until Thursday. Now, for the latest, we're joined as always by our reporter at courtside, Griselda Lewis, this morning. Good morning, Griselda. Thanks for joining us again.
Well, a very good morning to you, Eben.
This is really what the world is waiting for. Is there a bit of a scrum going on outside the court again today, Griselda?
Well, certainly there was just a few minutes ago there, Eben, when Oscar Pistorius arrived with some of the people who usually escort him inside this courtroom. Quite a media scrum, of course, to get the latest picture of Oscar Pistorius as those pre-sentencing arguments begin today. We're expecting, of course, the defense to begin mitigating factors. By that, I mean factors that could possibly lessen Oscar Pistorius' sentence. You'd know, of course, as you've pointed out, that culpable homicide in South Africa does not carry a minimum sentence. So Oscar Pistorius could really face anything from a fine to a suspended sentence and even up to 15 years in prison. But many of the law experts who we've spoken to say that 15 years is really unlikely. But of course, all of this is up to the discretion of Judge Thokozile Masipa and the factors that she certainly takes into account. But those factors that we're expecting the defense to focus on are, for example, the defense stating inside court that Oscar Pistorius is a first-time offender and that the court should really be lenient towards him in that respect, and that Oscar Pistorius has shown remorse. That's what we're expecting the defense to really push inside this court, to say that Oscar Pistorius has shown remorse for shooting and killing Reba Steenkamp. They'll point to the devastation that we saw, Oscar Pistorius vomiting, of course, and often inconsolable sometimes, in particular when he took the stand. And also to point out that Oscar Pistorius has suffered enough. Those are some of the factors that we're expecting the defense to put through, to say that Oscar Pistorius has suffered enough during this trial that we've seen here in South Africa. But on the other hand, the state we're expecting, once the defense has finished its arguments, we're expecting the state in aggravating circumstances to say then that Oscar Pistorius, even though he is a first-time offender, Oscar Pistorius has shown behavior of, or rather criminal behavior, in that you would recall there was a brawl inside a nightclub in Sandton when the court had adjourned, and they basically point to Oscar Pistorius' behavior and really try to convince Judge Thokozile Masipa and this court that Oscar Pistorius should spend some time in jail.
Is this going to take up the next couple of days and then sentencing will get underway with a judge? How will the rest of the week look like then, Griselda?
Well, what we're sensing at this time, Eben, is that initially we were expecting both the pre-sentencing arguments to finish at least by Wednesday, but we're hearing from the National Prosecuting Authority that that might take much longer. We might even see it stretch into, or at least until Friday, because you would recall that the state in this case would want to bring witnesses, additional witnesses, to drive home its point that Oscar Pistorius should go to jail. He should be held responsible for shooting and killing Reba Steenkamp. As you already know, Judge Thokozile Masipa did find that he was negligent when he pulled that trigger, hence the culpable homicide conviction. But of course, there's also the defense, on the other hand, who would want to call witnesses to testify that Oscar Pistorius is remorseful, that he has suffered, that Oscar Pistorius is a good person, that Oscar Pistorius didn't mean to shoot and kill Reba Steenkamp. So really, both sides are really playing their cards close to their chest. They're not indicating whatsoever how many experts or how many witnesses, I beg your pardon, they plan to call in this matter. So we'll really get an indication of how all of this will pan out once the proceedings get underway at 9:30 inside the North Gauteng High Court.
Griselda, just in conclusion, tell us about the families, who's there, and it seems as if there's an increasing little standoff between the families now. Would that be accurate, or is that an unlikely assumption?
think one really cannot assume whether there's a standoff between the Pistoriuses and the Steenkamps at this point, but certainly one cannot say there's any love between the two families, of course, given that Oscar Pistorius did shoot and kill Reeva Steenkamp. Well, we saw June Steenkamp arrive as well with the rest of the family here at the court. And I mean, as we've been indicating right through this trial, she's remained stone-faced. She hasn't been saying much. Yes, she has been granting interviews in the majority to international media. They're not saying much at all. We're not expecting the Pistoriuses to say anything as well until this case has been concluded. So, we're really looking at the expressions that we're getting inside court from both families. And, devastation, I guess, on both parts. But to what measure? Certainly, I'm not a clinical psychologist. I would not be able to gauge that, Eben. But, obviously, June Steenkamp would be very devastated. She's lost a daughter. Some have been saying that certainly a mother's love, the expression that she's had on her face, really shows, she doesn't show much emotion, but certainly some would say if you look deep inside, you'd probably find a woman who's really broken and devastated over the loss of her daughter, as she's been indicating in these international interviews that she's been granting.
Thank you very much, Griselda, setting up the start of today's proceedings in the North Gauteng High Court. Griselda will be giving us on-the-hour updates as to what's happening. She's going straight into the court. We were expecting court proceedings to get underway shortly after 9:30 a.m. this morning. We'll be live inside the court as sentencing procedures gets underway. As you heard, Griselda just told us that the defence will take first strike today in mitigation of sentence. But joining us now from our studio in Pretoria to reflect back on the last couple of months and today's proceedings is legal expert Marius du Toit from Du Toit Attorneys. Good morning, Marius. Thank you for joining us once again.
Thank you, Eben.
It's a few months that felt like it's flown by. Just give us your take on how this case has developed. It seems as if the world is split in two camps about the outcome that we'll see this week.
Well, Eben, we've seen many unprecedented things in this trial. I mean, we've seen it televised literally blow by blow, which we have never seen before. So I think for the first time we've had the public participating in court trials in a way that was really unknown to us. And I think that has been fantastic from the legal fraternity side, and of course it's been fantastic for the social media side to things. But interestingly enough, we're now getting to the end of it. I think it's been a brilliant trial in all scores. I think it's shown and it's been really a good expose of our justice system. We've seen Judge Masipa, so we see that we've got competent judges. We see we've got competent advocates. So I think in all scores it's really been a credit to the South African justice system. And of course we're getting to the business end of it now. And that's going to be interesting to see how that unfolds.
Now, Marius, culpable homicide, the judgment delivered by Judge Masipa has polarized the country, has polarized the world, as much as this case has polarized everybody around guilty and innocent. I know you can't put a number on it, but what is your expectation today? Everybody wants a number. There are reports in some quarters that even talk about only house arrest in this case for Oscar Pistorius. How do you read it?
Well, the interesting thing is, you're absolutely right. I don't think there's any fence sitters in this trial. Everybody has got an opinion. And I think the amazing thing is the starting point. We have to understand that because a firearm was used, many legal commentators are saying there's no minimum sentence. But there is a minimum sentence. There's a 5-year minimum sentence in terms of the Minimum Sentences Act of 1997, where a firearm is used in COP. So that's the starting point. So the judge can only deviate from 5 years imprisonment if she finds substantial or compelling reasons. Now, there isn't a maximum, but realistically speaking, the judge cannot go past 15, because the moment she imposes a sentence of 15 years imprisonment, that would, of course, be for murder, and she can't convict him or sentence him for murder when she's only convicted him of COP. So realistically speaking, I think we have to look at anything upwards and downwards up to 10 years. My feeling is that when you look at a matter like this, the severity or the degree of negligence is really the overriding factor for me. Even though we know that the court looks at the well-known triangle of factors. They look at the society's interest, they look at the seriousness of the offence, and they look at the personal particulars of the accused. But in this instance, I am firmly of the belief that because we have such a high degree of negligence, because we're not talking here about a person that his attention was distracted by a person sitting behind him in a car and incidentally drove into the rear of a person in front of him and the person got killed. We're talking about a person that discharged 4 shots through a door, and that's a high degree of negligence. So I would be inclined to say that the court might depart from the minimum sentence of 5 years and go upwards towards maybe 8 years. That's my gut feel.
I know it would be unfair to ask you the following question, but Judge Masipa has taken a lot of criticism in some quarters for what some people say was a very lenient view. How do you view the way that she dealt with this case?
Well, it's been really interesting. You know, one thing I can say about Judge Masipa, she would make an excellent poker player because she doesn't give anything away. I mean, throughout the trial, we were unable to read her at all. Now, many judges will play their cards during the course of the trial. They give you a very good indication as to where they're heading, especially during the address stage. And Judge Masipa did nothing of the sort. So it was really interesting when she handed down the judgment. I think she absolutely caught everybody off guard. We all had a sense that murder was at play here. We all felt that there was such a severe degree of recklessness on the part of Oscar by discharging 4 shots into a door where there wasn't really an attack on him, where he perceived there was an attack, but even that belief was not really reasonable. So I think many legal commentators were really concerned that the conviction might not be in line with our authorities. But having said that, you know, Judge Masipa, the first day when she gave judgment, she said, listen, he didn't foresee that he could kill Riva behind the door. Now, of course, he never foresaw that, but that was never the test. The test is, did he foresee that there was a person behind the door that could be killed? And did he reconcile his actions with that belief? Because that's what dolus eventualis is all about. But she qualified that on the second day. She did apply the test correctly. So I don't think Judge Masipa can be faulted for the fact that she's erred on the side of leniency when it came to making that finding. And I even think that it might be difficult for the state to appeal this, because on the issue of law, I don't think she's got that wrong because she qualified it the second day. So it's going to be really interesting to see where this is going this week and what she'll do on sentencing stage. But having said that, Judge Masipa has surprised us all along so far, and she might even do so when it comes to the handing down of sentence.
Now, last week we had an interesting revelation with the announcement of Jub Jub's murder sentence now being changed to that of culpable homicide. Your views on that, and do you think we can compare the two?
Well, it's always difficult to compare a car accident with a person using a firearm, and when it comes to sentence, even more so, because a firearm is just so much more dangerous. But having said that, you know, one has to understand how a legal system works, Eben. You know, the most important thing is, prior to the Jub Jub matter, we had the Humphreys matter. Now, in the Humphreys matter, 5 judges of the Supreme Court of Appeal overturned the conviction for murder, and they found that the person, although he foresaw he could kill the children in the taxi, he didn't reconcile his actions with that belief, and hence he couldn't be convicted of murder, and he could only be convicted of, I think, 10 counts of culpable homicide. Now, every court in the land, other than the Constitutional Court, is bound by that decision. So the moment that decision was made, it was only logical when the Jub Jub matter was considered that the court had to follow the Humphreys matter. And in following the Humphreys matter, they had basically no choice to say, well, listen, we can't find dolus eventualis, and hence we have to convict you of culpable homicide. So I don't think Jub Jub has necessarily set a new trend. I just think they followed an existing trend.
Marius, thank you very much for joining us today and giving us a complete picture of a lot of legalese and what we can expect today. Of course, on Facebook, everyone's been a lawyer the last year, and everyone today will be a judge, I'm sure. But let's take a look anyhow what you're talking about or what you're saying on social media at SABC Newsroom. Lan Huang says, expect Judge Masipa to be lenient and give Oscar Pistorius a suspended sentence and a fine with no jail time. Poor Revis Steenkamp and family, says Lan. James First says, truth to come, Oscar Pistorius, you are a vigilante and a danger to society. Jody Ban Arias says, R.I.P., rest in peace, Revis Steenkamp. Remember the victim, justice for Riva. Colin Kevin Null says, Oscar Pistorius, a case that has marked another dark chapter in SA's recent history. It has gripped all demographics and all world media. Indeed it has, but we can't lay it at the hand of South Africa. Faith is a bird that sings when the dawn is still dark. This is LJC. For you, Oscar Pistorius, support for Oscar. Of course, there's been lots of support for Oscar Pistorius, mainly from lots of single women around the world. Let's take a look now at the front pages from around the planet. The international New York Times is looking at the warning Kurds have issued to Turkey. This after a Kurdish leader threatened to derail a peace deal with Turkey in Ankara, which fails to intervene in the besieged town. Then the Washington Post has an image of the globalized web of militancy that's been sent to Syria. An estimated 15,000 militants from 80 nations have been sent to the war-torn country. Then here on the African continent in Nigeria, the Vanguard is reporting that the presidency there has opened up on the controversy surrounding the reported seizure by South Africa of Nigeria's $15 million meant for the purpose of purchase of arms for their intelligence service. Now, Ebola has grabbed the world's attention, including that of celebrities and sports stars. Let's hope they mean it. David Beckham is set to lead a campaign to stop the spread of the deadly Ebola virus here in Africa. As part of his role as a UNICEF ambassador, the former England captain will appear in a video which highlights ways to prevent the spread of the virus and will be broadcast across West Africa. The 39-year-old will explain how cleanliness is crucial in controlling the epidemic in Sierra Leone, Liberia and Guinea, as the death toll now has moved past the 4,000 mark. You are watching Newsroom. We'll be back after a short little break.
The Kenyan actress is the first from her country to win an Academy Award. Her Best Actress Oscar win has inspired many in Kenya.
Nyong'o's victory has made the headlines in all of the country's newspapers. This was Nyong'o's first role in a film after she had completed postgraduate studies in America.
Players in South Africa's music industry will attend the music exchange program in Cape Town, South Africa.
We as Africans, we have to embrace what is unique about us and about our music.
That's Afro Showbiz News, Saturdays, 7:30 p.m. on SABC News.
Welcome back. You're watching Newsroom on SABC News. Has political intolerance taken over our politics here in South Africa? The practice dates back to apartheid colonialism, as white minority race groups imposed their will over the majority with the extent of using violence. Much as national liberation forces fought furiously against it, political intolerance became ingrained in our societal fabric in many negative ways, it seems. In the 1980s and until recently, political intolerance was confined to followers of various political formations. Recently, political intolerance has taken forms of service delivery protests driven by political parties. Example of that is the Poo campaign in the Western Cape. A vehicle branded EFF was seen distributing tyres to be burnt, and the Democratic Alliance tried to march on the ANC headquarters. Political leaders have since joined, and in August, the National Parliament descended into chaos as the EFF demanded that President Jacob Zuma account to them in Parliament. Parliamentary sittings nowadays are characterized by walkouts, expulsions, and often defiance. Now, Professor Amanda Gous has written a lot about political intolerance and joins us live from our studios in Sea Point, just outside of Cape Town. Very good morning to you, Professor Gous. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning.
Professor, is South Africa sitting on a political time bomb orchestrated by elected political leaders who say one thing to the media and another thing to their followers And could this explode in the near future?
Well, I would like to start with the issue of political intolerance. And I think we have to be very cautious not to call all types of political violence political intolerance, because the way we measure it when we do research on political tolerance is that we look at opposing groups or groups that are disliked by another group, and whether people will allow their opponents certain civil liberties like freedom of speech, freedom of association, and freedom of movement. When they don't want to allow their opposition groups those rights, then we talk about political intolerance. Now, that is deeply ingrained in the South African context, and it was, I think, a major characteristic of the times before the transition in 1980, early 1990s. What we've seen now, for example, last week in Kutsong, with the EFF and the ANC clashing, but violence around bad service delivery, I don't think we can call that political intolerance. That's just plain political violence, and it's born out of frustration by people who feel that the government is not delivering on their needs. The point you make about, political leaders telling the public one thing and telling their supporters another thing, I think we can look at that as forms of intolerance depending on what they tell their followers. If they tell their followers that they should not allow opposition parties certain civil liberties, then we're talking about political intolerance. On the campus of the Limpopo University last week, we saw that the EFF and two other organizations won the election and ousted the ANC. And in the wake of that, you had large-scale vandalism of the buildings of the university. Now, that's another issue regarding a very important characteristic of competitive democracies, is that if you lose an election, you have to accept that you are the loser. And the turnover of power is the key element of a competitive democracy. And I think one of the big problems in South Africa is that losers don't want to accept the fact that they've lost, and that the majoritarian parties don't want to accept what we call counter-majoritarianism in the sense of checks and balances, like the public protector and like the media and all kinds of other checks and balances on their power. And this has become an enormous problem in South Africa.
What do you make of what's happening in Parliament? The kinds of walkouts and screaming matches, and is this opportunism, intolerance? What is it?
Well, I think the dynamic that we see in Parliament is one that's undermining, of course, the stature of Parliament, but it's also the fact that minority parties feel that they are up against a majoritarian party that's not listening to their needs and to their inputs. And so that's also linked to frustration. And then we shouldn't forget that the EFF is a populist party. Now, populism feeds on the idea that the people speak and the people should be listened to, and not necessarily the representatives of the people. I think what we see now, the debates in Parliament, is about who can shout the loudest, not about the content of arguments and the value of the arguments that are being made. And I think that's very dangerous, because you are then undermining the debates that need to inform policy making. And since the EFF have joined Parliament, we've seen an escalation of this to the extent that opposition parties now, they've walked out of the Nkandla committee, they've walked out when there was no satisfaction around the vote of no confidence in the Speaker. And that means that the majority governing party just continues with its work without the checks and balances of the opposition parties. So it's actually undermining the whole process of the opposition being part of policy making. And I think it's a very dangerous trend that we're seeing. But we also need to understand that people are quite frustrated with the way that the ANC is also undermining the constitutionalism of the democracy in South Africa.
Quickly, I want to talk about Kutsong last week, and I want to talk about exporting violence onto the streets. Are we going to see a political future where we see increased attacks on opponents. Councillors have to go in hiding, that sort of thing. Is this the future that awaits South Africa?
Well, we've seen that during the last days of apartheid prior to transition, that there was also very serious violence in different parts of the country between political opponents. And I fear that if this is the case, that because you are not happy with either bad service delivery or you don't like what your opponents have to say, you resort to violence to the extent that people are getting killed. It's a very slippery slope, because once that type of practice have sort of settled in, it's very difficult to get rid of it. And I think this is part of this idea that people don't want to accept the loss of power. They don't accept the fact that in a competitive democracy there are winners and losers, and sometimes you lose. And I think we need to do far more education around what a democracy is. It's a complicated system. And, in terms of elections and winning and losing, you can't just go around and kill your opponents if you don't like the outcome of a competitive situation.
Professor Amanda Gous, thank you very much for joining us today. We talked about political intolerance, the rise of it, the continued rise of political intolerance in South Africa. I can tell you that Judge Masipa has just opened the North Gauteng High Court. Let's go straight there for sentencing procedures in the Oscar Pistorius trial.
What's the name of the witness, please?
It's Dr. Lore, L-O-R-E, Hartzenberg. L-O-R-E, Hartzenberg.
Thank you. The name of this witness, or the image, no images of this witness, Dr. Hartzenberg, may be published in any form.
As the court pleases.
And can you just give an indication how long we're going to be?
Is it in respect of this witness?
No, not the witness.
My lady, we call 3 witnesses. None of them, I believe, will be long witnesses. And then there's a 4th person, that's the official witness, that's a person from the Department of Correctional Services, the Supervision Department.
Okay. And Mr. Nell, will the state be calling any witnesses?
Yes, we will be calling witnesses, my lady.
How many?
It's difficult to say at this stage because we cannot anticipate what the defence will need, yes. But at least 2.
Okay. So would I be correct that we will not need more than 1 week?
I will need more than 1.
No, 1 week. We shall not need more than
1 week.
1 week.
I hope not, my lady.
I also believe not, my lady.
Okay, thank you. The witness may be sworn in, please.
Lore Marie Hartzenberg.
Do you have any objections or anything else?
None.
Do you swear that the evidence you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Raise your right hand and say so help me God.
So help me God.
You may be seated if you so wish, Doctor. Thank you.
Thank you, my lady. Dr. Hartzenberg, you have 2 documents in front of you, and I will make the same documents available to the court as exhibits 4Bs, 4B1, BBBB1, and BBBB2. BBBB1 is in fact your curriculum vitae, and 4B2 is your report in this matter.
That is so.
Yes, you
Thank you,
may
ma'am.
proceed.
Dr. Hartzenberg, what are your qualifications?
My qualifications are a BA, a diploma in tertiary education, a B.Ed Psych, a M.Ed in career orientation, an M.Ed Psych, and a PhD.
Now, for your doctorate, what was your doctorate in?
My doctorate was cross-cultural trauma counselling within the context of domestic violence.
When did you obtain your first degree?
1973.
And your doctorate?
My doctorate I handed in 2001.
And after leaving university, where did you practice and what did you do?
I was in private practice as a psychologist in Elardus Park in Pretoria.
For how long?
Since I was registered in 1998 as a psychologist.
And have you been practicing since?
I have been practicing since.
It says educational psychologist. Can you explain that?
I did not do the normal route of educational psychology, which is usually school-based. I did tertiary education, where I have been training students as well as other psychologists and social workers in my field of expertise.
And how did the trauma counselling come about?
I did my research in trauma counselling and became known as someone who does do trauma counselling. I'm known to, I'm considered an expert in sexual abuse. I do forensic cases, psychoforensic cases, in rape cases, sexual assault, and child molestation. But I also do general trauma counselling as well.
Now, the document that is marked 4B1, that is your curriculum vitae. Do you confirm the contents thereof?
I do.
Now, Dr. Hartzenberg, before I start with your evidence and dealing with your report that I'm going to ask you to read into the record, when we approached you to be a witness, what was your attitude?
Milady, my attitude from the outset was that I was Mr. Pistorius' therapist and that I was not going to become involved in the merits of the case. My role was as a therapeutic, psychotherapy and support for Mr. Pistorius. So from the outset I indicated that I would not become involved. However, I was recently approached by the defense and I was requested to write a report regarding my observations and my impressions during psychotherapy. I thought very carefully about this and I came to the decision that I would come and share with the court some of my observations that I made during psychotherapy.
Dr. Hartzenberg, when did you meet Mr. Pistorius?
Mr. Pistorius was referred to me for grief therapy by a colleague, and I saw him for the first time on the 23rd of February 2013.
And have you been seeing him since, consulting with him?
I've seen him throughout the 18 months that I've been involved with him, at times daily, other times weekly, other times monthly. It varied. It varied in times as well. Some sessions were short, and some sessions lasted up to 2 hours. So it varied.
Before we deal with your report, if you can just give us some general insight into those sessions. What were they all about?
initially it was very difficult to, in the conventional sense of giving psychotherapy, to have sessions with Mr. Pistorius. He was very emotional. There were sessions that we couldn't conduct some of the sessions. Some of the sessions were just him weeping and crying and me holding him. And then other sessions we could get somewhere. So it varied.
But it was all aimed at trauma counselling?
It was all aimed at initially grief counselling, but it eventually went over into trauma therapy.
With that in mind, Dr. Hartzenberg, if we then turn to the next exhibit, that is BBBB2, which is your report dated 1 October 2014. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Before reading it in, do you confirm the correctness of this report?
I do, my lady.
You may then proceed.
Clinical observations and impressions gained during psychotherapy with Mr. Oscar L.C. Pistorius. Point 1 is preamble. I, Lyra Marie Hartzenberg, attached my abridged curriculum vitae, setting out my qualifications and my field of expertise. The highest qualification obtained by me is a PhD in psychology, obtained from the University of Pretoria. My doctoral thesis and my doctoral examination dealt with cross-cultural trauma counselling within the context of domestic violence. I am, inter alia, a trauma therapist who has dealt with various forms of trauma during psychotherapy sessions in my private practice. Mr. Oscar Pistorius was referred to me by a colleague who was aware of my work in trauma therapy. He was referred for grief therapy after the shooting incident resulting in the death of Miss Reva Steenkamp at his home on 14th February 2013. I also acted in a supportive and therapeutic capacity during his trial. I had my first consultation with Mr. Pistorius on the 25th of February 2013, and I have been involved in consultations with him for the past 18 months. Prior to this, I had no dealings or information with regard to Mr. Pistorius, other than that which I had occasionally read in the media. Mr. Pistorius and I had an agreement from the outset that I would not act as a witness in his trial. As his treating psychologist, I am not involved in the merits of the case. However, with Mr. Pistorius' consent, I ultimately agreed to prepare a report of my clinical observations and impressions gained during my professional involvement with him over a period of 18 months. 2. Clinical observations. Initially, Mr. Pistorius presented with acute stress reaction, ICD-10 code F43.0. Subsequently, prominent symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, DSM-5 309.18 and ICD-10 code F43.10, and depression were noted. I referred him to a psychiatrist, Dr. Gert Bosch, for psychopharmacological treatment. Mr. Pistorius is currently still under Dr. Bosch's treatment. Mr. Pistorius presented in therapy with feelings of guilt and remorse, often overwhelming him or restricting his affect. Frequently, he was too emotionally drained for therapy to commence, and sessions had to be rescheduled. He frequently spent sessions weeping and often had to exit or excuse himself from a session due to retching. This mainly occurred when recounting his sensory perceptions of the shooting incident. Besides the retching, he presented with obvious physical symptoms of perspiring, a pale pallor, trembling, pacing up and down, which are all typical signs of anxiety and trauma. Point 3, recurring therapeutic themes. 3.1, loss of Ms. Reva Steenkamp. Mr. Pistorius was deprived of the opportunity to mourn the passing and loss of someone he loved immediately after the incident, as a result of the charge of premeditated murder, as well as the ever-present media focused on him. He was saddened that he could not attend Ms. Steenkamp's memorial service and funeral. This would usually offer closure to a grieving person. Exacerbating his grief was that he recognized that it was he who was ultimately responsible for the death of Ms. Steenkamp, resulting in unresolved guilt for him. His attempts to process Ms. Steenkamp's death and the circumstances that she died in has been an ongoing and uncompleted theme in psychotherapy. Although he did go through the expected stages of the grieving process, he kept on looping back to previous stages of grief, thereby remaining in an unresolved spiral of grief without resolution. This form of grief processing is also known as complicated grief. His initial shock and frequent crying defined the sessions at the outset, but was also present throughout the subsequent therapy as well as during this trial. He directed anger and blame toward himself, and at stages questioned God's grace and forgiveness as well as his own faith. His anxiety was noticeable and had an impact on his day-to-day functioning, including his ability to eat and sleep. Throughout the therapy sessions, Mr. Pistorius expressed his longing for Ms. Steenkamp and the void he experiences living without her presence. Mr. Pistorius has not been able to reach a stage of acceptance and healing in his grieving process. Mr. Pistorius' remorse with regard to his role in Ms. Steenkamp's death was unabated during therapy sessions. His concern for Ms. Steenkamp's parents was an unremitting theme throughout my contact sessions with him. He found it distressing that he could not make any personal and private contact with them to express his extreme sorrow and devastation at the loss of their daughter. The only opportunity he had to express this, as a result of Ms. Steenkamp's parents not wanting to meet him at that stage, was in public during the trial, and then he was attacked. He felt that he was damned if he did and damned if he did not. Mr. Pistorius had a future planned with Ms. Steenkamp to the extent that he paid a deposit on a house that he wanted to share with him. He had included her in his plans to accompany him to sports and business trips abroad. He lost his vision and his aspirations of building a future with Ms. Steenkamp when she died, leaving him bereft. Point 4. Consequences of the shooting incident for Mr. Pistorius. The nature of the charge of premeditated murder had a ripple effect nationally and internationally, for it played out on the world stage and on a 24-hour television channel in South Africa. This gave rise to numerous experts airing their views on Mr. Pistorius' character and the trial. He was often portrayed in an adverse light, which perpetuated negative perceptions of him to the public who rely on information from the media. This gave rise to a platform of abuse in the media and social networks that had a significantly detrimental effect on his emotional functioning and behavior before and during the course of the trial. The impact on his perception of self and his opportunity for healing was destroyed by the malevolent reports and public comment. Mr. Pistorius has acknowledged that he is essentially a lonely person who finds it difficult to form trusting relationships as a result of his career path and the pressure of international travel and fame. As a result of him standing accused of the premeditated murder of Ms. Steenkamp, he experienced the loss of the mutual friends he shared with Ms. Steenkamp. This was particularly devastating for him at the time when he needed the support of friends the most. He felt isolated as a result of this. Mr. Pistorius's fall from being an icon in world athletics, who was revered and celebrated, to being vilified and humiliated in some media reports and social networks, had a profound effect on his identity of self. Although he was aware and appreciative of the positive support he had also received, Mr. Pistorius experienced himself as utterly worthless, devastated, and guilt-ridden. This has resulted in a loss of his identity and self-belief, as well as the loss of his reputation, on which he felt his integrity was founded and judged by others. As a world-class athlete and celebrity, he had a platform to make a difference to other disabled and disadvantaged individuals worldwide, which was meaningful to him. He did this through his many different programs, for example, as an international ambassador for the Laureate Sports for Good Foundation. He feels he has now lost his voice to make a positive contribution to those disadvantaged communities he worked in and to the children with disabilities he was known to inspire. Mr. Pistorius felt that he worked hard to create this platform of activism for the advancement of others. Mr. Pistorius has been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder by various experts who have assessed him. The effects of PTSD are such that the flashbacks and the re-experiencing of the shooting will be mental images he will always carry with him, making it difficult for him to escape from this. The symptoms of intrusive memories, attempts at avoidance, for example, places and people that remind him of the incident, with persistent trauma-related emotions, increased emotional arousal or reactivity, known as hyperarousal, will be part of his life until such time that healing has taken place. Point 5, summary. Throughout my psychotherapy sessions with Mr. Pistorius, I've never found him to be anything other than a respectful, caring, and well-mannered person. Although he did at times show irritation and frustration, especially during the trial, this was not unexpected given the context within which this behavior presented. I never once saw him lose his temper, even when provoked by others or during his severe cross-examination by the state. I did, however, find him to be anxious, at times suspicious and hypervigilant, always being aware of his personal safety. This behavior formed part of his symptoms of PTSD. In my involvement with Mr. Pistorius, I can confirm his remorse and pain to be genuine. Mr. Pistorius expressed that without the support of his family and friends and his deep faith in God, he would not have been able to withstand the significant pressures that this trial has placed on him. The healing process and any form of closure that poor Mr. Pistorius, is compromised and damaged by the constant negative attacks against him. He feels that this has been premised by inaccurate facts regarding the shooting incident. Mr. Pistorius expressed his horror at the leaked photographs of the scene of the shooting, viewing this as disrespectful to Ms. Steenkamp and others who are close to Ms. Steenkamp. The weight that the loss of Ms. Steenkamp by his own actions has had on Mr. Pistorius is incalculable and cannot be quantified. Added to this is Mr. Pistorius' awareness of the pain and suffering that the Steenkamp and Pistorius families have suffered as a result of Ms. Steenkamp's death. Mr. Pistorius is suffering from PTSD and major depressive disorder as diagnosed by Dr. Bosch, his psychiatrist, and confirmed in the psycholegal report of Professor Jonathan Scholes and Dr. R.G. Holmes. It is foreseen that Mr. Pistorius will require intensive and ongoing psychotherapy. What we are left with, my lady, we are left with a broken man who has lost everything. He has lost his love relationship with Ms. Steenkamp. He's lost his moral and professional reputation. He's lost friends. He's lost his career and therefore his earning potential and also his financial independence. On an emotional level, his self-perception, his self-worth and identity have been damaged to the extent that he is unlikely to fully recover from the consequences of the shooting incident that occurred on the 14th of February 2013.
I have no further questions. Thank you, my lady.
Yes,
This is the court, my lady. Like, I've now become accustomed to this report was handed to me moments before the court started. So I'll start with this and then ask the court indulgence just to consult with us. I have also not received any other reports of any professional people that may give evidence. Madam, may I start with the last paragraph, 5.6? One gets this in all arguments for mitigation. We're dealing with a broken man. What would your views be of the Steenkamp family? Would you not expect a broken family?
Milady, I have no doubt in my mind that the Steenkamp family must be suffering immense pain. And there is no doubt in my mind that they are a broken family.
I will need evidence to indicate that Mr. Steenkamp suffered a stroke as a result of what happened to his daughter in this case. Can you deny that? Would you expect that?
Milady, I'm not a medical person. I don't know Mr. and Mrs. Steenkamp personally. I accept that if this has happened, it could possibly be as a result of this, yes.
But you're a trauma counsellor. I will need evidence to say that Mrs. Steenkamp would just collapse on the floor in a house, crying uncontrollably of what happened. That is what one expects from a mother that lost a child, am I right?
I'm sure that is right.
We're now dealing with a broken man, but he's still alive. He can still pursue his career and walk outside, and he has intention to do that, am I right?
I do not know that he has the intention to do that, my lady. In the 18 months that I was involved with him, he did not show any inclination or intent to continue with any type of career.
Are you telling me that in your counselling of this accused, You never discussed what will happen after the trial, how we'll continue being an athlete. Not at all.
The severity and the degree of post-traumatic stress disorder suffered by Mr. Pistorius, we took one day at a time.
But then answer the question, please. Just answer the question. Did you discuss that he will continue his career after the trial?
I did not, milady. We took one day at a time.
Why would a trauma counsellor not do that?
The severity of his trauma was such that every session that he came was dealing with the incident.
Should, as a trauma counsellor, you not give him hope for the future?
I gave him hope for the next day.
And hope would include the man who lived for athletics to continue with his career or not?
Milady, I think that's a question for Mr. Pistorius to answer himself.
You know, that's not the way out, madam, not at all. I'm dealing with a trauma counsellor that wants the court to accept her views. And I'm asking you why you did not do that. Why did you not discuss his continuing career as an athlete?
We did not discuss that. He was, in sessions, he was so tired that sessions couldn't take place. But I do recall one incident, and I said to him, one day, when this is all over, what would you like to do? And he said to me that his uncle had a school in Mozambique, and nothing would make him happier to go and work with the children in the rural school in Mozambique. That he did tell me.
Okay. Is that all, madam? Because, you know, we're dealing with his career as an athlete, and you slipped that in, it's fine. Is there anything about his athletic career that you discussed with him? That's the question.
No, we didn't.
Do you know that he resumed training?
I know that he I think he went to the University of Pretoria's. He ran one day at the University of Pretoria. I had nothing to do with that. It wasn't something we discussed. That's all I know. I know he trains some mornings in the gym at the house.
I just want to get a clear response from you. As far as him resuming his athletic training, you know of him having been to the track once.
I know him being to the track once because it was in the media, and I know about that, yes.
Now, I see you saying it was in the media, so you did not discuss it with him?
We did not discuss his we definitely did not discuss his future as an athlete, because as he sat there before me, there was no future as an athlete.
Now, can I ask you, okay, firstly, the report. When did you finalise this report? I see it's dated the 1st of October.
Yes.
Is that when you handed it in?
Yes.
And it's now the 13th of October?
Yes.
I see. Now, in consultation with either the accused or the defence team, was there any discussion about Mr. Pistorius after the trial? What would happen with him?
No, milady, there wasn't. Not from my side. Not from my side. I explained to Mr. Pistorius from the beginning, I used the analogy of hurdles, and I said to him, it's like running a race with hurdles, and we need to get over each hurdle as we get to it. And that is how we focused on staying in the here and the now and dealing with what he had to deal with in the here and the now. So this is the hurdle, this is the one we're getting over. And that is how we worked in our therapy.
Now, I've read your report fleetingly, and at paragraph 5.6, you said he has lost his career and therefore his earnings potential and all his financial independence. So that, am I right, if I make the inference, if I read that sentence, that you're saying he will not go back to the track and he will not pursue the career of a professional athlete?
Lady, those were my impressions. As I said in the heading, my impressions. That is what I think.
So
I cannot.
Sorry.
I cannot speak for
Because
Mr. Pistorius, whether he's going to do this or whether he isn't going to do this. I think that there are many things that are going to depend on what is going to happen in the future.
But for the one person that spent time with him from February 2013 throughout the trial up until now, your impression is that he's lost his career. Am I right?
As it stands now, that is my impression.
So whatever other witnesses will testify today that the man has got potential, he can still do well, the court should take that into account, you would frown on that.
Milady, of course he has potential. He has many, many facets of potential. The fact of the matter is, it depends what happens from here on, what is going to happen with him. He didn't have the energy. He didn't have the motivation to even talk about going on with his career. Anything can happen. Of course he's got the potential. I'm not saying he doesn't have the potential.
All I'm doing is I'm dealing with one paragraph, 5.6. One paragraph, your last paragraph. You indicate to the court, take the following into account, and I've marked them. He has lost his love relationship with Steenkamp, with Ms. Steenkamp. That's number one. Am I right? You can follow it if you want to. He has lost his moral and professional reputation. That's point number 2. He has lost his friends. That's point number 3. So then the court should take those 3 into account. And he has lost his career. But you don't even know that he's lost his career. But that is something that you want the court to take into account. Why would you do that?
Milady, as it stands now, and we don't know what the future holds. I don't know what the future holds. As it stands now, he has lost his career. He's lost all his endorsements, all his sponsorships. So as it stands now, he has lost his career. What happens in the future, I don't know.
Good. Now let's deal with the future. He's lost his love relationship. He will be able to love somebody else. Because we're talking future, you're talking now. Am I right? He will be able to love somebody else later.
I wish I had a crystal ball, then I would know as well.
But
I don't know. I cannot answer that question. I cannot see into the future. I can only deal with that I know, that I saw in my consulting rooms, in my therapy with Mr. Pistorius. That's all I can deal with.
You see, the one thing I read about your paragraph 5.6, and I'm sure you'll agree, this deals with Mr. Pistorius. Shame. He's lost his love relationship. He has lost his moral and professional reputation. He has lost his friends. He has lost his career. This whole report deals with Mr. Pistorius and just him. Am I right?
Lady, I only dealt with Mr. Pistorius, so I can only report on Mr. Pistorius and my dealings with him.
But as a professional person giving evidence, indicating to the court all your qualifications, don't you think it should have been more balanced in your reporting?
Lady?
By saying what society would want, perhaps?
Lady, I will leave that up to the court to decide. That is not my role. It's the court's role.
Have you ever been involved in the counselling of a family that whose daughter or son or just child was killed during a traumatic experience, criminal experience. Have you ever been involved in that?
I have been involved with parents who have lost their children in traumatic circumstances.
Criminal acts?